The stars in the sky are going out, one by one. But no one notices it. No one can stop it. I'm racing to the last place where there still is hope. I need to make it before it's too late. Sounds of agony will quickly fade. The world will be destroyed, even if the memory of it will be gone. And even if there's absolutely no chance of bringing it all back, there will always be someone who's willing to do the impossible. In a place without space, without time, without memories. Oh, that's the good stuff. The real good stuff. And they wasted no time getting right to it too. Hey everyone, Wanderbot here, and today let's take a look at the runaway success of what's already one of 2021's greatest games, Loop Hero. A quick step backward for those of you unfamiliar with the game. Loop Hero is an incredibly slick, roguelite RPG where you guide a lone hero on his quest to restore reality from absolute oblivion. The core gameplay centers around populating a small loop that the hero perpetually travels around, giving him statistical increases and summoning monsters for him to slay for EXP and loot. Other than that, it's a very hands-off and rather relaxed game, yet despite its relative simplicity, it's absolutely exploded in popularity. But why? There are a lot of factors in play, namely Devolver Digital's PR Midas touch, the sheer quality of the game itself, but most of all, the pure value of novelty in an increasingly crowded market. Since the first two factors are more tertiary to this video, we're going to disregard them for now, though I promise I'll make videos on them later. For now, I want to talk about novelty. Oh, and a quick note, well, none of this stuff that I'm showing is directly spoilers, like I won't spoil the plot. You may see a couple of gameplay things that are kind of hidden later on in the game, so if you truly care about that stuff, I'd say pick up Loop Hero, play it yourself, and then come back to this video. Loop Hero was announced back in December of last year during Devolver Digital's parody announcement segment of the Game Awards 2020, where they gave it their own Game of the Year award before revealing the game to the world for the very first time. The trailer itself was short and to the point, showing off pretty much everything Loop Hero had to offer in less than a minute, and immediately set itself apart from anything else that was shown that night. Especially since the majority of the announcements, surprise or otherwise, were of sequels, remakes, or new franchise titles that ultimately will bring more of the same to the table. I'm sure many of these games will be great, but there's nothing terribly new about Dragon Age 4, Arc 2, Endless Dungeon, even though I am looking forward to it, and so on. So Loop Hero stood out, and continues to stand out even after its release. I have no idea if Devolver knew how well it would do, or how much Loop Hero would stand out amongst the other announcements, but considering how savvy they are at marketing, I bet they did. And like I said, PR Midas touch. Ultimately, Loop Hero is not a true masterpiece of game design, nor will it change the face of gaming as we know it, nor will it likely even spawn that many copycats, even though I hope it inspires a few great devs to follow in its footsteps and improve the formula. But like I said before, it stands out. You don't really play Loop Hero, since 4 quarters automated the hero's movement and the combat, which are arguably the two most common forms of player control in any game ever. You can't tell the hero to stop, turn around, rest up, or anything else. All players are allowed to do is to temporarily pause time or to quit the run entirely, mostly to preserve all of the supplies they'd received over the course of the run. Instead, like I said earlier, all you can do is place tiles around the loop, or manage the hero's inventory, picking up the best equipment for the challenges ahead. Otherwise, it plays itself. And that's awesome. It's a bizarre evolution of both the auto-battler genre and the idle game genre, but with a greater sense of risk versus reward that's accentuated by the fine-tuned micromanagement of the land tiles. I often found myself weighing the merits of spawning tougher creatures for greater loot against the risk of an early loss, and spent a great deal of time finding new ways to mitigate the growing risk that came with subsequent loops. It was as engaging as it was challenging, and I personally couldn't get enough of it. Especially since most of the game is left up to the players to discover, or to spoil for themselves on a wiki. I'm not judging. Leading to feelings of discovery and collaboration between other players, as everyone raced to find out all the unique tile synergies and how best to use them. This is a delightful contrast to most other games, who simply put everything on the table from the start, and end up losing all sense of exploratory learning along the way. It's a trade-off that most developers gladly make in order to make their games more accessible, which makes total sense for 99% of games on the market. Additionally, while sheer quality is not necessarily something that should be necessarily noteworthy, Loop Hero feels like a complete package. Emphasis on should. The industry could certainly learn a thing or two from Loop Hero's example. It's a game that set out to accomplish a very specific set of goals, and did so with an incredible degree of style and quality. It feels like the developers had a very clear vision in mind throughout the development of the game, and never lost sight of it, nor gave into unnecessary bloat. It's a very simple idea, and they refined it incredibly well. And lastly, Loop Hero did not launch into early access, though according to the developers, they have more planned in the future. But apart from that, the game itself was complete at launch, and can stand well enough on its own, without any post-launch support, to expand the already considerable amount of content available. While being a complete game at launch shouldn't be notable, it was extremely refreshing all the same. I am very tired of early access. So why is Loop Hero's novelty so important? It's because the gaming industry is filled with sequels, spiritual successors, follow-ups, and franchises, where almost every game on the market can be traced back to another game before it, where only the absolute most unique truly stand out anymore. Well, either that or the absolute best of the best. It's because, despite launching in one of the absolute busiest weeks for roguelike releases ever, Loop Hero had no issues rising above the rest and dominating social media for the entire launch window. Why, you may ask? Because in comparison to all of the others, Loop Hero was an entirely unique concept, whereas most of these games drew inspiration from Dark Souls, Enter the Gungeon, Slay the Spire, and so on. This meant that they had to meet and surpass pre-existing standards set by their predecessors. But because Loop Hero is so unique and novel, there is no comparison to be made, and thus, people were far less likely to pass it up. One other key difference is that Loop Hero, unlike so many other games on the market, but especially during its launch window, has zero barrier for entry and can be beaten by anyone if given enough time. That isn't to say that Loop Hero is easy, far from it in fact, but since there is no demand for Twitch-based reflexes, finely tuned skills, or unlimited free time, there are far less reasons to stay away from the game. Take Titan Souls for example, which I would say is of comparable quality in many respects and was also published by Devolver Digital. I loved it dearly, but it's undeniable that the game is incredibly punishing to the point of no longer being fun at times. And I'm sure that that reputation helps it gain the following and success that it achieved, but it also repelled many more casual gamers. There's absolutely a value in a game sticking to its guns and keeping the barrier for entry high, be it incredible graphics that only high-end machines can run, absolutely brutal difficulty, or incredibly fast-paced gameplay. But there's a high risk-reward to it too, and I've seen a great many games fail because they made their game too overwhelmingly inaccessible to more casual audiences, and could not attract nor retain a substantial enough of the hardcore market to survive. A wild star. Which is partly why I feel the need to highlight how Loop Hero was handled. It absolutely has every element that the more hardcore player base would want, but without any of the turnoffs that would drive away more casual players, allowing almost everyone who does pick it up to enjoy it without issue. Not to mention, Loop Hero is $15, which is right at that sweet spot where most people will gladly just buy the game on impulse instead of waiting for a sale. Sure, they probably could have charged double and made nearly as much, if not more money overall, but that certainly would have reduced the absolute surge of new players that picked it up at launch, and undercut its popularity in turn. Lastly, and admittedly, this section is partly a result of my own personal bias, but Loop Hero's original soundtrack is quite possibly one of the absolute best I've heard in a very long time. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of absolutely great soundtracks in recent memory, but most of them are just background music that is great to listen to, but rarely do they go above and beyond at amping up the games that they're paired with. But Loop Hero's soundtrack does exactly that. No matter how many runs I did, there was always a building anticipation as I placed down tiles leading up to summoning a boss, and man, the moment that meter filled up and the boss music kicked in, it was always simply sublime. Even now, I'm tapping my feet to this song. It's just that good. and it really does wonders at accentuating the absolute mood that Loop Hero is aiming for. Either the hype as you rampage your way through the forces of evil on your way down to another boss, or the tension as you slog your way through threat after threat, unsure of whether or not your dwindling health and potion supply will be able to carry you through to a win. Plus, Loop Hero's soundtrack is pretty dang original, and I've got to imagine that that helped it stand out just that much more. Ultimately, I have no idea where Loop Hero will rank in the echelons of indie greatness. Perhaps it will end up comfortably alongside many other cult classic indie darlings like Gungeon, Isaac, Spelunky, Celeste, The Witness, Hollow Knight, and really, honestly, any game by Supergiant, and so on, where people will continue to play and talk about them years after the developers have stopped developing and promoting them. Or maybe it will just fade into obscurity after its brief but brilliant moment in the spotlight. Time will tell. But there's already lessons to be learned from Loop Hero's success, especially in such a saturated market of equally great or even greater games. And I seriously hope that future prospective indie developers keep it in mind when making their own games. Speaking of the future of Loop Hero, I seriously hope that this isn't the end for the game either. If we're lucky, 4 Quarters will make the most of its popularity and build upon what's already there in a manner similar to how dodge roll games supported Gungeon. They've already confirmed that they have future plans for Loop Hero, and once they're done polishing what they already have, and blasting any remaining bugs, they plan on adding some amount of new content that they had cut from the original release, either due to time or budget constraints. If we're really lucky, we'll get more story of some kind due to Loop Hero's fairly open ending, more equipment variety with more unique effects, more interesting classes to play with, more unique tiles to place down around the loop and in town, and maybe, possibly, mod support. The framework for greatness is already there, and what's already there is already great. But whenever I play Loop Hero, I can tell that there's still so much left untapped, and I hope 4 Quarters takes it all the way. And on a more admittedly selfish note, I would like to see some derivations from other perspectives as well. I know the word clone is a dirty word in gaming, but I would definitely love to see something akin to what Monster Train is to Slay the Spire. Familiar enough to be comfortable, but packed with enough original ideas and quality to stand on its own 2 feet, with or without the comparison to its predecessor. Admittedly, there are at least a dozen or so other major and minor factors that helped Loop Hero stand out so much. But the value of novelty, the low barrier of entry, and the original soundtrack are the ones that I feel like helped the most. And helped more so for Loop Hero than most other games on the market in such a way that I felt compelled to highlight them especially. Because in highlighting them, I also hope to further signal boost just how great of a game Loop Hero is. It's already one of my absolute favorite games of 2021, and will likely get thrown into my positively massive list of games that I think everyone should at least try, if not play through completely. So if you're watching this video and haven't tried Loop Hero yet, I highly encourage you to do so. Either now or at a later date once 4 Quarters is completely finished with the game. It's already well worth the price of admission, and I doubt most of you will regret the time that you put into it. Though I would recommend sticking around to knock the smug skull off the Lich at the very least. He deserves it for deleting the universe. And that is all I have to say about Loop Hero, at least for now. There's at least several more pertinent discussion points that I will save for future videos. But before we go, I'll leave you all with a question. Have there been any games that caught you by absolute surprise, either because they popped up out of absolutely nowhere, or were so unique and so novel that they stood out among all the rest? If so, please tell me about it in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please leave me a like. It helps more than you know, and it lets me know that you like videos in this vein, as this channel is a grand experiment of mine, and I really like to know what I should be focusing on. And if you want to see more like this, hit subscribe, because I've got a massive list of games and topics that I want to talk about in depth. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Also, of course, before we go, thanks to all my Patreons and channel members on the main channel for making this video possible. If it weren't for you guys, I'd probably make far less of these. And before we go, quick QA while the credits go. Wander, what's your favorite kind of music? To the surprise of absolutely no one, I love game music. It rarely has vocals, tends to have a very specific mood and ambiance, and crosses all genres, which exposes me to a lot more music than sticking to one specific type of music. Otherwise, I'm a huge fan of post-rock. 65 Days of Static, who did the No Man's Sky music, have some absolutely fantastic albums from the before times. I also rarely dabble in listening to rap. Sage Francis and Historian himself, if that actually counts as rap, are really inspiring for wildly different reasons. If you could forget a game and play it again, what would it be? Gosh, maybe Hollow Knight or Outer Wilds? Those games are masterpieces, and the sheer feeling of discovery in both games on a first playthrough are pretty much unparalleled. But all the same, I kind of would never want to forget them because the experience was so magical that first time around.
Wanderbot. Change the world, my final message. Goodbye.